Welcome to the debate. Today, we're dissecting three words that have managed an impossible journey. We're looking at a phrase that went from the blood-soaked cobblestone streets of 18th century Paris straight to the algorithmic neon-lit feeds of TikTok. Eat the rich.
It really is a phrase that has completely saturated our cultural groundwater. I mean, you see it scrawled on cardboard at picket lines in Detroit.
Yeah, you hear it sampled in chart-topping hip-hop.
Right, and ironically, you buy a ticket to see it as a central theme of Oscar-winning cinema. It is everywhere, and that ubiquity creates a really strange paradox. On one hand, it serves as a rallying cry for a generation facing historic wealth inequality, a generation that feels totally locked out of the economic future.
Absolutely.
But, on the other hand, it's a meme. It's a hashtag, a vibe. It occupies this bizarre superposition between a genuine demand for wealth redistribution and, a commodified pop culture aesthetic that you can literally buy on a t-shirt at the mall.
And that is exactly the tension we need to resolve today. The core question we are facing is this. Does the slogan, "Eat the Rich," represent a legitimate, historically grounded demand for economic justice? Is it a necessary articulation of class conflict? Or has it devolved into a hypocritical, performative signal that actually obscures the real solutions we need? I am taking the position that this phrase is a potent, necessary metaphor. It serves as a diagnostic tool for a failing system.
And I disagree.
Well, I'd argue it highlights systemic inequality in a visceral way that polite policy language simply cannot. And it has deep historical roots that give it weight far beyond the internet cringe compilations you seem so fond of pointing out.
Fair enough. But I am taking it to position that the phrase has become actively counterproductive. It suffers from a fatal lack of definitional precision. While I understand the anger, today the phrase manifests less as a revolutionary stance and more as first-world hypocrisy. It's become a fashion statement for the comfort class that, frankly, flirts with dangerous extremism while alienating the very coalitions needed to actually fix the economy. I'd argue it has become a barrier to progress, not a driver of it.
Let's get right into it then. And I want to start by stripping away the modern gloss. We really need to understand that this isn't a slogan invented by a branding agency or a bored teenager in a suburban bedroom. This is a historical cry of desperation.
You're referring to the French Revolution connection, I assume?
Precisely. We have to ground this in the history. The phrase is most commonly attributed to the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a man whose ideas on the social contract were fundamental to the era. The quote, which gained massive traction during the French Revolution, is, "When the people shall have nothing more to eat, they will eat the rich."
It is a terrifying image.
It is meant to be terrifying, but look at the context. This wasn't a literal threat of cannibalism for the sake of cruelty. It was a statement of cause and effect. It's social physics. If you starve a population while a nobility hoards grain and flaunts excess, violence is the inevitable output. When we see this phrase resurging in the 2020s, appearing at Elizabeth Warren rallies in 2019 to support a wealth tax, or being adopted by the Land Party in South Africa, it isn't because people are just trying to be edgy. It's because the conditions are rhyming with history. We are seeing a return of the have-nots in a way that feels completely existential to them.
I don't dispute the historical lineage at all. Rousseau is obviously a titan of political thought, but I strongly dispute the modern application. You're drawing a straight line from the starving sans-culottes of 1793, people who literally had no bread, to a college student in 2024 tweeting from an iPhone about how much they hate capitalism. That is exactly where the hypocrisy gap opens up.
That feels like a dismissal of the underlying economic reality. I mean, just because someone has a smartphone doesn't mean they can afford rent or health care.
It's a critique of the rhetoric, not the suffering. Let's actually look at the danger aspect before we even get to the hypocrisy. Words have consequences. As of 2023, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, has explicitly associated the phrase "eat the rich" with what they classify as anarchist violent extremism, or AVE.
You're citing a government watch list to delegitimize dissent? That feels like a very classic move to silence opposition.
I'm citing it to show how the rhetoric is perceived by the institutions responsible for public safety. Look, The FBI's Domestic Terrorism Symbols Guide notes that while using the phrase isn't a crime, obviously we have the First Amendment in the United States, it is a marker used to identify potential violent extremism. When you use the language of the Reign of Terror, you really shouldn't be surprised when people worry about a reign of terror. It signals a move away from democratic reform toward total destruction.
I think that characterizes the movement as far more violent than it actually is. But let's go back to the history for a moment, because I think you're glossing over why it was used then and why it's used now. It wasn't just Rousseau. On October 14th, 1793, Pierre Gaspard Chalmette, the president of the Paris Commune, gave a very famous speech. He was speaking during the height of the terror, yes, but he explicitly referenced Rousseau to justify the actions of the revolutionary government against hoarders and speculators.
He was justifying the guillotine. Let's be very clear about that.
He was justifying survival in a time of severe famine. He said, essentially, that the wealthy had declared war on the poor by hoarding resources. The eating is a metaphor for redistribution. When I hear that phrase today, I don't hear a call for violence. I hear a call for a wealth tax. I hear a call for food security. To strip it of that intellectual charity and focus only on the scary words is to completely ignore the suffering that generates the words in the first place. You're focusing on tone policing rather than resource allocation.
But that intellectual charity is exactly what the modern usage makes impossible. You want me to read Eat the Rich as a sophisticated demand for a marginal tax rate adjustment. You want me to hear it as a nuanced policy proposal. But when you look at how it actually propagates in the wild, that is simply not what is happening.
Give me an example of what you see in the wild then.
Look at TikTok. In 2019, and throughout the pandemic, there was a massive trend of Eat the Rich content. But the targeting was completely incoherent. It wasn't directed at the 0.1% who owned the means of production or the massive multinational conglomerates. The anger was directed at people who studied abroad in college, people who had a Spotify premium subscription.
Social media is always messy. You can find bad takes on literally any topic.
It wasn't just messy, it was cannibalistic, pun intended. My favorite example, and by favorite I mean the most depressing, was the vitriol directed at people who had a second refrigerator in their garage. This wasn't class warfare against the bourgeoisie. This was a circular firing squad within the middle class. When the definition of rich slides down to include anyone with slightly more comfort than me, the movement loses all political utility. It becomes a purity test, not a policy platform. It turns neighbors against each other while the actual billionaires are totally unaffected.
I think you are over-indexing on teenagers and algorithmic noise. Of course, social media discourse lacks nuance. That's the nature of the medium. But does a bad tweet invalidate a legitimate labor movement? I don't think so.
It invalidates the slogan if the slogan is the primary vehicle for the movement. If your slogan confuses your allies with your enemies, you need a new slogan. If Eat the Rich means attack the guy with the Spotify account, you've lost the plot.
I disagree that it confuses the allies that actually matter. Let's look at where the rubber meets the road here. Organized labor. You want to talk about political utility? Let's talk about the United Auto Workers. In 2023, Sean Fain, the president of the UAW, didn't shy away from this rhetoric. He leaned into it.
Sean Fain is a serious operator, I will grant you that. The stand-up strike was a masterclass in strategy.
It absolutely was. And during those strikes against the big three, Ford, GM, Stellantis, he framed the conflict explicitly as a war between the working class and the billionaire class. He used the Eat the Rich sentiment to draw a hard line. He wasn't talking about refrigerators. He was talking about record corporate profits not trickling down. And guess what? It worked. They secured historic wage increases. They reinstated cost of living adjustments.
They won because they had leverage, and they halted production, not because of a slogan on a sign.
The slogan galvanized the membership. It gave them a narrative. It defined the enemy. Look at Christian Smalls, the leader of the Amazon Labor Union. In 2022, he goes to the White House to meet President Biden. Does he wear a suit and tie to fit in? No. He wears a jacket with Eat the Rich painted right on it.
Which, again, circles back to my point about performative aesthetics.
It wasn't performative. He was in the Oval Office. That is the exact opposite of performative. That is confronting power directly. He was bringing the message of the warehouse floor straight to the president's desk. These leaders prove that despite the second refrigerator discourse online, the core signal of the phrase is still received loud and clear by the people who actually challenge capital. It has teeth in the real world.
I would argue Small succeeded in spite of that jacket, not because of it. But let's pull on that thread of aesthetics for a minute. You mentioned Small's jacket. I want to talk about how this slogan has been commodified. You claim it's a threat to the system. I claim the system has already eaten the slogan and sold it back to us for $15.99 a month.
You're talking about the movies.
I am talking about the Eat the Rich cinematic universe. It is practically a genre now. In 2019, we had Parasite, Joker, Knives Out, Ready or Not. In 2022, we got Triangle of Sadness, The Menu, Glass Onion. These films follow a very specific formula. Rich people are grotesque, poor people are desperate, and violence ensues.
Art reflects the times. If people are angry about wealth inequality, filmmakers will make movies about wealth inequality. That is how culture works.
But look at who is making them. These are massive studio-backed productions. Netflix released a docuseries literally titled Eat the Rich, the GameStop saga. There's a comic book series called Eat the Rich. When a revolutionary slogan becomes a marketing tag for a multi-million-dollar production, it has been neutralized. It's what Mark Fisher called capitalist realism, the system's ability to absorb and monetize its own opposition.
Or it has been amplified. You can't start a conversation if no one is talking about it.
No, it becomes a spectacle. Listen to this. In 2024, the Neuchâtel International Fantastic Film Festival used Eat the Rich as the theme for a retrospective exhibition. You could buy a ticket to a gala to celebrate a slogan about destroying the gala. It allows audiences to engage in safe rebellion. You watch the menu, you cheer when the restaurant burns down, you feel like you've done your political duty, and then you go home and order something on Amazon Prime. It functions as a pressure valve that protects the status quo rather than threatening it.
That is a very cynical take, but I see the logic. However, I think you're confusing the medium with the message. Just because a message is delivered via a Netflix subscription doesn't mean the viewer doesn't internalize it.
But does it spur action, or does it just spur merchandise sales?
It spurs consciousness, and consciousness precedes action. You mentioned the hypocrisy earlier. I want to circle back to that because I think it's the weakest part of the critique. You say Eat the Rich alienates the middle class because of the second refrigerator stuff, but look at the timeline. The usage of the phrase spiked specifically following the COVID-19 lockdowns in 2020.
Right, during the height of the uncertainty.
That wasn't a fashion statement. That was a moment where the essential workers are risking your lives for minimum wage, bagging groceries and driving delivery trucks, while the billionaire class added trillions to their net worth from the safety of their yachts and private islands. The disparity was so naked, so obvious, that the slogan became the only rational response.
A valid observation of disparity, certainly. The pandemic laid those fault lines bare.
Exactly. The slogan functions as a barometer. When you hear it getting louder, it is a warning signal. It means the social contract is broken. If you ignore the signal because you don't like the violent imagery or because you think the movies are too commercial, you are ignoring the smoke alarm because you don't like the sound of the beep. You're complaining about the noise while the house catches fire.
My argument isn't that we should ignore the inequality. My argument is that this specific smoke alarm is broken. It rings when there is a fire, yes, but it also rings when someone buys a latte. And because it rings constantly and indiscriminately, people have stopped listening.
They haven't stopped listening. The UAW strike proves that. The victories in the labor movement prove that.
The UAW strike proves that strikes work, that organized labor works. But let's look at the broader political landscape. In a democratic society, to pass a wealth tax, which is the actual policy goal here, right? You need coalitions. You need the working class, but you also need the moderate middle class. You need the suburban voter.
And you think this scares them off?
Absolutely. When you scream "Eat the Rich," and the FBI is flagging that language as adjacent to violent extremism, you terrify the moderates. You frame economics as a zero-sum war. You tell them, we're coming for you.
But economics is a zero-sum war when resources are finite and hoarding is rampant.
It doesn't have to be. That is the failure of the slogan. It implies destruction, eating, consuming, destroying, rather than constructing. It suggests we fix the house by burning it down rather than fixing the foundation. And that scares away the very people you need to vote for the fix. It makes the movement look like a mob rather than a government in waiting.
I would argue that fixing the foundation has been the promise for 40 years of neoliberalism, and the inequality has only widened. The slogan resurfaces when polite negotiation has failed. It appeared in 1793 because the French monarchy refused to reform. It appears now because the modern economy has failed to deliver on its promises.
But it is indistinguishable from a Motorhead song. That's the dilution problem again. Motorhead had a song called Eat the Rich. Aerosmith had a song, Eat the Rich, in 1993. P.J. O'Rourke wrote a book called Eat the Rich. It is background noise. It is a t-shirt at Hot Topic. When a phrase has been in circulation in pop culture for that long, it loses its edge. It just becomes retro.
And yet it scares you. You just said it terrifies the moderates. So which is it? Is it a harmless pop song, or is it a terrifying threat?
It's both, and that is exactly the problem. It's terrifying to the people you need to persuade, and it's a harmless commodity to the people you want to overthrow. It fails on both fronts. It disappoints me because it takes genuine, righteous anger that should be channeled into specific policy demands, and funnels it into a meme that is easily dismissed by serious policymakers.
I don't think Sean Fain or Christian Smalls are dismissed. And I don't think the millions of young people facing a future where they will own nothing are dismissing it. They are using the language available to them to articulate a breaking point. They are saying, we see what you are doing and we will not accept it quietly.
And I fear they are using language that ensures they will remain unheard by the people with the power to change it. They are opting for catharsis over strategy.
We are coming up on time, so let's crystallize this. You see a slogan that has been cannibalized by the culture it critiques. You see a first-world hypocrisy that turns potential allies into enemies over Spotify subscriptions and garage fridges.
Exactly. I see a tool that has become counterproductive through commodification and imprecision. Between the FBI warnings regarding anarchist violent extremism and the Hollywood blockbusters turning it into popcorn entertainment, it has lost its revolutionary edge. It has just become a brand.
And I see a phrase that, despite its messiness, remains the most potent articulation of our current crisis. Whether it's Rousseau in the 18th century or a union leader today, Eat the Rich is a mirror reflecting a society where the gap between the haves and the have-nots has become intolerable. It is a warning that if we don't address the hunger, literal and economic, the metaphor might stop being a metaphor.
That is a sobering thought. It suggests that whether we view it as a threat or a commodity, the persistence of the phrase from 1793 to today proves that the underlying wound hasn't healed.
It certainly hasn't. And until it does, the slogan isn't going anywhere.
Thank you for joining us on the debate. We encourage you to look beneath the slogans on your timeline and question what they really signal and what they obscure.
Until next time.